There are many ways in which people find out that their partner is cheating on them. Some are informed about this by friends or relatives. Others have suspicions due to the increase in time spent outside the house. Some find physical evidence, while some notice a sudden decrease in their partner's intimate interest. Incriminating messages or emails, mysterious phone calls when they are hung up, and searching for evidence for no reason also arouse suspicion. Unfortunately, some even witness adultery firsthand. In my case, I stumbled upon the truth completely by accident. My name is George Fitzsimons, although most people just call me Fitzy. During these events, I was the 18-year-old spouse of Elizabeth, known as Liz. I would call us a pretty typical couple. We grew up less than 2 kilometers apart in Ashwood, a suburb of the eastern part of Melbourne, Australia's second-largest city. Despite our closeness, we only met after graduating from university, when we both worked. Our first meeting took place in a city nightclub, where after a short conversation, mainly about expensive taxi fares, we decided to take a taxi home together. It wasn't really love at first sight, rather, convenience brought us together. However, we soon started dating, spending a couple of evenings a week together. Almost 3 months after we met, we finally became close. Before that, we kissed and flirted, but we were at ease, perhaps because it was more convenient to share expenses. We weren't just friends, but we weren't exactly lovers either. Everything changed one evening after another trip to a nightclub when we found ourselves playfully teasing each other in the back seat of a taxi. Liz looked at me and giggled. "Why don't we, do this properly?" she asked, with a mischievous smile. "I don't know," I replied. "Maybe because we both live with our parents and we have nowhere to go. My parents and brothers are not at home today. I'm home alone," she said. I nodded. The time has come. We went to her place where the stern gazes from her Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt posters on the bedroom walls greeted us. There, we quickly undressed and settled into bed. Neither of us had much experience back then. Looking back, my performance might have only warranted a 3.5 out of 10. Despite this, it was enough for us to become a serious couple. We navigated dating, engagement, and eventually tied the knot. Soon after, we realized we could afford to buy a house instead of renting. I was a young electronics engineer during the booming electronics industry, while Liz excelled as an accountant with a keen interest and understanding of computers, just as they were becoming integral in her field. As dinks, double income, no kids, we purchased a slightly worn-out 2-story, 4-bedroom house in Burwood, providing ample space for a family. However, children were not in our cards. Despite our efforts, it never happened, and we accepted it, focusing instead on enjoying an increasingly satisfying intimate life, leaving the rest to nature. Nearly 20 years later, we still resided in a house much too large for just the two of us. The expansive workshop and 4-car garage prevented us from downsizing. I've always been curious about how things work. I used to dismantle items just to understand their inner workings, often making improvements so they functioned better when reassembled. I also enjoyed inventing, and one of my early inventions was an innovative car fuel filter with an easily replaceable filter element. Unfortunately, I sold the idea for a $10,000, and the company that bought it from me went on to make millions from it. Since then, I've been more cautious with my inventions, patenting everything but struggling to bring products to market. Despite the missed opportunity, the money did allow me to buy my father's HK Holden Brougham from my siblings after he passed away. Since then, I've added a genuine XU1 Tirana to our car collection, alongside our daily drivers, my SS Commodore and Liz's BMW 3 Series. Our garage is full, but our house feels empty. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, it was quite strange how I discovered Liz was cheating on me. At that time, I was working on developing an in-car camera for taxis that could record both front and rear views. This idea has since become widely used, but unfortunately, I was too late to bring it to market. While testing my prototype, I wanted to see how long it would run on battery alone if disconnected from power. That night I was heading to the car club, so I placed the camera on the dresser in the main guest bedroom facing the wall and started it recording. Then I drove to the club in my brougham. Liz wasn't home when I left, which wasn't unusual since my job valued productivity over attendance, allowing me to work efficiently in my home workshop without distractions. In contrast, Liz commuted from the city and often returned late. After a late night at the car club, I returned home after 11 to find Liz already asleep in our bed. I joined her and soon fell asleep myself. The next day, Friday, I completely forgot about the taxi camera. It wasn't until Saturday, when Liz was away at a family gathering in Adelaide where her parents had retired, that I had the house to myself. I managed to find a few minutes in the afternoon to plug the camera into my laptop and review the footage. All I had to do was go to the end of the file and check how long the battery had been working. I saw that there was still free space on the memory card, which means that it was not filled before the power was turned off. Instead of scrolling to the end right away, I scrolled forward a bit and checked both views, the wall from the front camera and the bed from the pinhole camera at the back. I repeated this several times until I noticed something. The front camera was still showing the wall, but the back camera was showing the back of the man my wife was with. I was so shocked that I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to turn it off. I didn't want to see it. It couldn't be true. But my hand wouldn't obey. I was breathing heavily, gasping for air, my heart pounding wildly as I watched a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, being with Liz. I was furious. It was supposed to belong exclusively to me. It's scary to think what I would have done to Liz if she had been at home when I discovered this. There was a punching bag in our home gym which we hardly used, and I stumbled downstairs and pounded on it until I fell. With each stroke, I imagined that it was him. I imagined that it was her. And oddly enough, I even imagined that it was me. I can't explain it. I was completely out of my mind at that moment. I have no idea how much time has passed. Exhausted, I collapsed on the gym floor, and my mind, usually mobile and carefree, was now consumed with thoughts of revenge. I wanted to hurt her, but even more I wanted to hurt her, the one who promised me loyalty. I came up with simple, sophisticated, and even fantastic ways of revenge, imagining that I was turning into a mix of Bruce Lee and Sylvester Stallone. But I was just furious. When I finally got up, it was already dark, but some irrational urge made me return to the computer, which was now put into sleep mode. I played the apology video several times, trying in vain to find an excuse. They entered the room without outerwear, barely exchanging a few words. From the laptop's tiny speakers, I could only hear the sounds of proximity. When he was done, they lingered for another 5 minutes before Liz slipped out from under him, muttered "shower," and led him away. He was smiling triumphantly, and she was unsteady on her feet. They did it for 45 minutes, a real marathon compared to our usual 5 or 10-minute meetings. Anger mixed with a sense of inferiority in me. 15 minutes after they left, Liz returned and gathered up their scattered clothes before leaving again. She showed up 5 minutes later, tidying up the room. I changed the sheets, making sure everything looked as usual. From time to time, she would touch her wrong gender with a painful grimace mixed with a smirk. It only fueled my growing hatred for her. Sometime later that evening, a vague memory popped into my mind. Jenny. I tried to drive it away, but it wouldn't go away. It came up again and again until I couldn't ignore it anymore. 10 years ago, I helped Jenny, a neighbor who was stuck on the side of the road with a flat tire. Not only did she not have the knowledge to change it, but also the jack. I gave her a spare tire, and she invited me to teach her the next day. I lived a little further down the street. We bought a jack, practiced replacing the tire until it got used to it, and then went into the house to clean up. While I was washing my hands in her bathroom, she was standing behind me. In the mirror, I saw Jenny snuggling up to me, calling me her hero. She kissed me, and soon we were kissing back. Despite her desire to remain faithful to Liz, Jenny took me to her bedroom and pushed me onto the bed with a mischievous smile. I was under her control that day. When we were done, she smiled and we washed up. "Same time tomorrow?" she whispered in my ear, and I nodded silently. That night I was filled with remorse. I felt completely defenseless. I was sure that Liz would somehow find out about this and leave me, her unfaithful husband. However, Liz didn't notice anything, and the next day, at the appointed hour, I found myself at Jenny's door again. Jenny and I lived together for 5 weeks, meeting every weekday. Despite my fear of exposure, I couldn't resist Jenny's charm. But one day, after another meeting, she said, "We can't keep doing this." I nodded sadly and left. The next day I rang her doorbell, but no one answered. I avoided Jenny's house for a while, but later discovered that it was for sale and had already been sold. I never confessed my infidelity to Liz, eventually hiding it deep in the recesses of my mind. I never pursued women like Jenny again. The fear of being caught was too great. So there I was, staring at the images of my unfaithful wife on my laptop, when memories of Jenny, long buried, began to torment me. It struck me then. I was a hypocrite. Liz had merely mirrored my own transgressions. Yet instead of confronting her, I found myself consumed with thoughts of her lover. Perhaps revenge on him was justified. After all, he had engaged with another man's wife. But even that rationale faltered. Had he known Liz was married? Had I ever bothered to ask Jenny about her marital status? Ignorance seemed an inadequate excuse. My mind swirled with conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, remorse, and confusion. Amidst this turmoil, one perplexing question surfaced. While I could reluctantly comprehend Liz's actions, her lover was young and exciting, whereas I was older and more mundane. What did he see in her? Liz, too, was no longer as youthful or attractive as she once had been. We were not affluent, just comfortably middle class. Could their affair have been driven by career ambitions, an attempt to advance through illicit means? That night I struggled to make sense not only of my feelings, but also of the motives behind the betrayal that had shattered my world. On Sunday, I woke up unrested and uncertain. Throughout the day I agonized as Liz's return approached. What should I say? What should I do? When she finally arrived, I still hadn't made up my mind. Instead, I took the cowardly approach and pretended that everything was fine. How could I accuse her angrily of something I had done myself? It was then that I began to build a wall between us, a barrier that offered me some protection from the painful truth I had witnessed. Some might view my actions as weakness for not confronting her. Looking back, even I consider myself weak in that moment. But when faced with such a situation, normal thoughts and actions become impossible. It's like existing in a surreal, half-real world, where every move feels sluggish and unclear. Making significant decisions feels particularly daunting. I felt detached, as though watching a movie, waiting to see what the protagonist, me, would do next. I desperately hoped that what had occurred was an isolated incident, something I could bury deep in my mind like I had done with Jenny. But to do that, I needed assurance it wasn't an ongoing affair. Over the next week, anxiety and questions consumed me while I struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy. Emotionally, I was in turmoil. Was I losing my wife? Had I already lost her? Was she in love with someone else? Practically, I was in turmoil too. I pondered whether I'd keep the house if we divorced, if I could manage the hefty mortgage, if I'd retain my cars. My self-esteem suffered. Was I less of a man for not taking action? Was I headed towards being a cuckold? Throughout this, Liz remained quiet, never questioning my moodiness. For a week, neither of us initiated intimacy, which was unusual. We both avoided the issue, and I teetered between wanting to confront Liz angrily and wanting to seek solace in her arms, consumed by conflicting emotions. Somehow I managed to get through to Thursday without confronting her. Once again, I set up the camera in the spare bedroom and left before she returned home. This time I took the Commodore, a less conspicuous choice than my classics, parking it in a dark side street with a view of my house, waiting silently in the darkness. Shortly after 7 o'clock, a car passed by my house and parked 2 houses ahead. Liz emerged from the front passenger seat and walked to our house, letting herself in. As usual, I had left the outside and front room lights on, allowing me to track her progress through the house as each light illuminated. My heart sank when she turned on the light in the main spare bedroom. It seemed last week wasn't an isolated incident as I had hoped. After some time, the driver of the car exited and headed straight for our house. Liz opened the door for him before he reached it, welcoming him inside. I felt a strong urge to confront them. This man was likely about to be intimate with my wife. Though I couldn't confirm his identity from where I sat, I assumed it was the same man as before. Instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to investigate further. I got out of my car and walked past my house to theirs. It was a silver Lexus, 4 or 5 years old. Not overly luxurious, but the badge suggested affluence. I noted down the license plate number and returned to my car. I trembled with anger, but I concealed myself behind my emotional barrier, pretending not to see through it. I had devised a plan for myself and was determined to stick to it, though I struggled to restrain myself from confronting them directly. Well, metaphorically speaking, I didn't actually possess any firearms, which was probably for the best given my state of mind. Somehow, I managed to hold back. Just over an hour after he entered my house, and I assumed bitterly, my wife, the jerk slipped out my door and returned to his car. I followed him. My plan was straightforward. This man was my adversary, and I needed to gather more information about him. You know, knowledge is power and all that nonsense. Feeling somewhat foolish, like an amateur spy, I trailed his Lexus for about 15 minutes until we reached Doncaster East. He turned into a driveway where the garage door opened upon his approach. He drove inside and parked beside a small black Volkswagen convertible before the door shut behind him. Confrontation wasn't an option there, but that wasn't part of my plan anyway. I noted down the address and drove away. What had I discovered? While I was away, my wife was regularly meeting a younger, very fit man. Perhaps others, too. I knew I couldn't match him in a fair fight, but that didn't matter. I had no intention of playing fair. The man she was with tonight drove a modest version of an expensive car and lived in a nice house in an upscale suburb. It suggested a good job and ambition. Another car in the garage meant he had a partner. This wasn't someone living with their parents. His Lexus was the family's primary vehicle. But what could I do with this newfound knowledge? I pondered until after 11, then quietly returned home and slipped into bed beside my sleeping, unfaithful wife. She was deeply asleep and didn't stir at all. The next morning, after Liz left for work, I took out my camera and went through the agony again, watching an exciting video of my wife cheating with the same man she was with last week. This time they spoke more openly. Liz called him David, and he affectionately called her my love. David was disgusting. There's no other way to say it. Throughout their meeting, he often confessed his love to Liz and urged her to leave her loser husband to be with him. At first, Liz tried to downplay the significance of their relationship, calling it just a passing infatuation, and reiterated her love for me. But he insisted. He insisted that she deserves gifts such as jewelry, flowers, and chocolates. But first, she needs to leave me to get them without revealing their affair. Unlike the previous time, he was more gentle, showing affection with kisses and caresses. His words and actions indicated that he had some plans, and it was clear that Liz was starting to hesitate. I had no clue about David's intentions, but even in my troubled mental state, it was clear to me that I needed to take immediate action. It seemed he wanted to lure Liz away from me, and although I was uncertain about my own feelings for her, I was determined not to let him succeed. I was also gripped with fear. Confronting her and threatening divorce now seemed risky, as she had a seemingly appealing alternative. I acknowledged that my initial reaction to her affair was tempered only by the time I had to process everything and think things through. This reflection made me realize I was being hypocritical, and it allowed me to gather some information about my rival, though it wasn't much. Ultimately, I decided Liz deserved the same chance. I needed to end her affair promptly, but give her space to contemplate before facing me. So I disappeared for the weekend without a word. I was tempted to call her at work and fabricate an excuse, but I feared she might seize that opportunity to invite her lover back before receiving my message. I concealed the camera and the files very securely. She would have the entire weekend to search for them, and I didn't want her to find anything. Then, using my webcam, I created a short film. Looking directly at the camera and trying to stay composed, I said, "Liz, there's no easy way to say this, so I'll just say it outright. I know about your relationship with David, and I have video evidence of it, so there's no point in denying it. Before I lay the blame entirely on you, I have to confess that years ago, I had an affair with Jenny, our neighbor whom I helped when she had a flat tire. I don't know if you suspected or knew about it, but I can't act holier than thou in light of my own history of infidelity. I'm giving you until Sunday afternoon to decide how you want to handle this situation. I want us to discuss where we stand and whether we want to continue together, but I can't do that if your affair persists. Knowing you're with another man is tearing me apart. Please, consider the current circumstances and what you envision for our future. I'll be returning home early Sunday afternoon, and by then, we both need to be prepared to share our thoughts and decide what happens next. I needed to give you ample time to think this through. It's the only thing that kept me from acting impulsively when I found out. See you on Sunday." I left my cell phone on the bedside table and drove east in the brougham, aiming for anywhere but here. The weekend had been dreadful. Friday night was spent in a rundown motel in Morwell, followed by a slightly better one in Inverloch on Saturday night. Finally, on Sunday morning, I headed back home. But was it really home anymore? As I arrived, the first thing I noticed was Liz's car still in the garage. That was a relief. At least she hadn't left without a word. I let myself in, and there she was in the hallway looking at me. I wanted to smile, but couldn't, and it seemed she struggled with the same emotion. We stood silently staring at each other for too long before Liz nodded and turned away. I followed her into the dining room where we sat across from each other at the table. Adversarial was the word that came to mind, but I kept it to myself. "How did you find out?" she finally inquired. "Does it matter?" I responded. "Yes," she insisted, clearly concerned, prompting me to explain. "I was testing a taxi's in-car camera and left it running in the spare bedroom to check its battery life. When I reviewed the footage, I discovered you." I trailed off, taking a deep breath to compose myself. "Were you trying to catch me?" she asked sharply, her tone filled with anger. "No," I assured her. "I had no suspicion or intent to catch you doing anything. I had no clue." She pondered for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "Are you thinking of leaving me for him?" I ventured. "No," she replied firmly, and I felt a wave of relief, though doubt still lingered. "Do you want to leave me?" I pressed. She shrugged non-committally and looked at me. "What did she mean to you?" she asked, steering the conversation in a direction I knew was inevitable. "It was enjoyable," I admitted, trying to be truthful. "It didn't mean anything." She nodded. "Same here," she said. "Do you want to leave me?" I shrugged, uncertain. "We'll take it step by step," I said cautiously. "But I need to be sure it's over between you two." She frowned. "I'm not sure," she muttered. "It's my only non-negotiable," I asserted firmly. Liz got up and went to the kitchen. She returned a few minutes later with 2 beers, handing me one. I nodded my thanks, opened the beer, and waited for her to speak. "You want this... us... to work," she finally said. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have approached it this way." "To be honest, I don't know," I replied honestly. "I'm angry, I'm disappointed, and I'm not sure if trust can be rebuilt." "I feel the same," she said, and I nodded. I had given her the ammunition. There was no reason why she shouldn't use it. "So you're saying you want me to end my affair just in case you decide to forgive me and want me back," she stated. Her voice remained steady, yet carried weight. "No," I responded. "I'm saying I can't make rational decisions while knowing you're still involved with him." She nodded. I didn't need to articulate further. "That seems rather one-sided," she remarked. "One-sided would have been me hiding my past," I pointed out. She nodded again. We each took a sip of our drinks and let the silence linger between us for a while. "This was never supposed to happen," she murmured. I met him at our usual bar after work. He struck up a conversation when my last two colleagues left and I was still nursing half a glass of wine. He was fun, attentive. It was exhilarating. I nodded, allowing her thoughts to settle. He bought me a few more drinks, and I guess I got a bit tipsy. At first he was quite gentlemanly, but soon he started touching my arm when he spoke. And it felt good. He made me feel attractive. I nodded again, realizing I hadn't made such an effort in years. Finally, I mentioned that I need to catch the train home. He asked where I lived, and when I answered, he offered me a ride. After drinking a little more, I agreed. When we arrived, he insisted on going inside and making sure I was okay. As soon as the door closed behind us, he kissed me. I tried to push him away, but he said he wanted to do it all evening, she whispered, lowering her head and staring at the table. After that, the situation escalated, she continued. I was pretty drunk, so we ended up in the bedroom and... Her voice trailed off. "I know the rest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my fists were clenched. He clearly intended to get her into bed. "It's happened twice already," Liz said, looking up at me. "The second time, he started acting possessive and started pressuring me to leave you." I nodded, trying to process it all. "Is that what you want?" I asked quietly. "I do not know," she whispered with tears in her eyes. "I thought you didn't love me anymore, but you were like that. Honestly, I think I'm just confused." She started crying. I wanted to go up to her, hug her, and tell her that I love her, that I want her to stay. But I couldn't. For the past week, every time I closed my eyes, I saw these images. Knowing about their affair is one thing, but seeing the evidence on the video was an unbearable torment for me. "I'll cook us something to eat," I finally said. "We both need time to think." We nibbled on biscuits and cheese, sipped wine, and engaged in a strained, wandering conversation about work, weather, and everything except the glaring issue between us, our relationship. "I'll end it with him," Liz eventually declared, breaking the tension. "Even if we're not right for each other anymore, something just feels off with him." I silently breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you," I responded, meeting her gaze. "Should I tell him that you know?" I inquired cautiously. "Why?" "It just feels wrong," I explained, "like there's more to this than meets the eye." She nodded in agreement. "I feel it too. Okay. I'll just say I can't continue because of my conscience." "Thank you." "So what now?" she asked. It was a valid question. We continued sharing a bed, but neither of us made a move toward intimacy. We tried to pretend nothing had changed, but we both knew it had. My emotional barrier remained, and it seemed Liz had erected one of her own. True to her word, Liz called David and ended things. He pleaded with her to reconsider, professing deep love. That set off alarm bells for both of us. Liz skipped her usual after-work drinks that week, and on Friday a colleague mentioned some young hunk asking about her. I stayed home that night, unsure if David would show up at our door, but he never did. We felt like we were barely keeping our heads above water, but deep down, we weren't ready to give up. Little did I know, Liz had gone to see her doctor and gotten tested for STDs. We managed to muddle through a week and a half of uncertainty before the next unexpected twist. It happened on a Wednesday evening, nearly 2 weeks after Liz's second betrayal. I had dropped by my local pub for their pot and parma special, something I did a couple of times each month, mostly to escape the toxic atmosphere at home. As I sat at my table engrossed in a football game on the sports channel, a young woman approached me. She appeared to be in her early 20s, though it's hard to gauge these things accurately nowadays. She was strikingly beautiful, slender, of medium height, with long, straight blonde hair and captivating blue eyes. Her attire, a scanty black dress, seemed more fitting for a nightclub than a neighborhood pub. She came up to me looking slightly uncertain. "Are you Barry Thomas?" she asked tentatively. "No," I replied, offering a friendly smile. "Really? You look just like him." She hesitated. "You're not kidding me, are you?" she inquired. "No," I assured her, though I couldn't help but think of a few things I'd like to do with her, considering those legs of hers were quite something. "Can I sit with you for a moment?" she asked, and immediately, warning bells started ringing in my head. Why would a stunning woman like her suddenly want to join me? "Sure," I agreed, "but I won't be here long." She flashed a bright smile and took a seat. "You really resemble Barry," she remarked, "and he was so attractive." The alarm bells grew louder. "Is that so?" I responded, deciding to play along with her flirtation to see where it might lead. I glanced at her ample and prominently displayed chest for a moment, and when I looked up, she was grinning knowingly. It was too obvious. "Oh, yes," she purred in a husky voice. "I adore a real man, one with experience." "Uh-huh," I nodded. "Can I get you a drink?" I bought her a drink, and for the next 30 minutes I entertained her advances. In less than 5 minutes, she was holding my hand, gazing into my eyes as she spoke. It wasn't difficult to feign interest, but I suspected there was a catch. When we finished our drinks, she glanced at me, fluttering her eyelids. "Fitzy, would you like to go somewhere private?" she asked. "Larissa, I'd love to, but I can't tonight. I have to leave," I replied. "Oh, really?" she said, giving me a pleading look. "Yeah, but what?" she eagerly inquired. "I might be able to return in about 40 minutes, I suggested. "Great," she exclaimed. "Give me your number, and I'll let you know if anything comes up," I said. She gave me her mobile number, assuring me she'd be waiting. Some people might have fallen for this, and I might have too if my wife hadn't gone through this exact scenario a few weeks earlier. Something seemed off, and I needed answers. I left the parking lot and headed towards home, but I pulled over out of sight. After waiting 20 minutes, I returned to the pub's parking lot, parking in the shadows away from the other cars. Half an hour later, I called Larissa, sadly explaining I couldn't make it that night, but suggested meeting again at the pub next Wednesday. Reluctantly, she agreed. I waited just 5 minutes until she emerged from the pub and headed towards her small black car. After she drove off, I discreetly followed, keeping a considerable distance. My inner Fitzy, the amateur spy, was back in action. I trailed her all the way to Doncaster East, cruising past as she parked her Volkswagen beside David's Lexus in the garage. It confirmed my suspicions completely. Emboldened by my successful spying, I parked a few houses away and returned to David and Larissa's place after a brief wait. My plan was to check their letterbox for any clues to their real identities. However, they had secured it with a small padlock, thwarting my attempt. Disappointed, I headed home and sat down with Liz. "I had a girl hit on me at the pub tonight," I told her, and she looked surprised. "Oh, really?" "Yes." "Was she attractive?" Liz asked nervously. "Very," I replied, "and quite young." "That's odd," she said. Did you—" "No," I cut in. "It seemed too coincidental. But I did follow her home to see where she lives." Liz frowned. "Why would you do that?" "I'm trying to figure out what's going on," I explained. "She lives with David." That caught her attention. "How do you know where David lives?" she asked. "I followed him another time," I said. Liz shook her head. "Why?" she pressed us. "What do you think they're up to?" I don't know, I admitted, but I'm determined to find out. Liz nodded, and we left it at that. It was probably the most serious conversation we'd had since discussing my weekend away. I decided that my first priority was to identify these individuals, so I retreated to my office to prepare an envelope. I knew they resided at 48 Regional Street, Doncaster East, under the names David and Larissa, but that was the extent of my knowledge. I needed more detailed information. The next day, I began canvassing the neighboring houses on Regional Street, and it was on the third attempt that I struck gold. "Yes?" the woman behind the screen door inquired curtly. "Hello," I greeted cheerfully. "My name is Craig Harrison, and I live on Fraze Road, a few streets away. I received a misdelivered letter, and I'm trying to determine the intended recipient, but the street number was omitted," I explained, holding up the prepared envelope. "Oh." The woman's tone softened considerably. "That's thoughtful of you. What does it say?" "It's addressed to someone with initials L, something, maybe Davis or a similar name, and it lists Regional Street, Doncaster East. Do you know anyone around here that matches?" Without hesitation, she replied, "We're the Greggs, I'm Ann, so it's not us. Next door on one side is Frank Holmes, who lives alone, and on the other side are Sue and Jason Tan." Her voice suggested a discomfort with having Asian neighbors. "Across the road are David and Larissa Furness, and next to them—" She continued for a while, naming all the residents she knew. "No," I finally interjected. "None of them seem to fit. Thank you so much for your help. I'll continue further down the street and see if I have any luck." "Okay," she nodded. "Good luck." Soon after that, I returned home and started searching. I located Larissa on Facebook, where her account had no privacy settings. From her posts, I learned she worked as a beauty therapist, and one of her photos showed Sammy's pampering salon. I called the salon and mentioned that my wife had requested me to find out when Larissa would be working next. They informed me she would be in over the weekend and offered to schedule an appointment. I said I needed to confirm with my wife and would get back to them once I knew a suitable time. Finding David was more challenging. If he had a Facebook account, it was well protected with privacy settings that prevented me from seeing it. To track him down, I created a fictitious LinkedIn account under the name Craig Harrison and began my search anew. Eventually, I discovered that David was a trainee lawyer at Anderson and Phillips. I had to wait until Liz returned home to ask her if there was any connection between either Larissa or David's workplaces and hers. I had already determined there was no connection to my workplace. "No," she replied after a pause. "I've never heard of either of them." "Damn," I muttered. "I've come this far but still can't see the connection." "I have an idea, though it might sound silly," Liz offered, catching my attention. It was the first sign of real engagement she'd shown throughout this process. "What is it?" I asked, intrigued. "Let's ask them directly." "Huh?" I was puzzled. "Let's sit them down and ask why they've been doing this," she elaborated. I considered it, then smiled. "That's not silly at all. It's brilliant," I exclaimed, smiling at her. She returned the smile, and I felt like the walls between us were finally beginning to crack. My phone buzzed with a message, and I glanced at it. "It says, 'Can't wait for next Wednesday, love LXXXO,'" I said, pushing the phone toward Liz. She read it and raised her eyebrows. "Her?" "Yeah. She seems eager." I nodded, and she pushed the phone back. "If we go through with this," I said thoughtfully, "we only get one shot. We have to act completely comfortable together. They can't suspect any issues between us." Liz mulled it over. "I can do that," she affirmed. "Can you?" "Yes," I replied, hoping I sounded convincing. "All right, what's the plan?" We discussed it briefly before springing into action. I called up a nice restaurant and booked a table for 4 for the following Wednesday evening. Afterward, we drafted an invitation. George and Elizabeth Fitzsimons kindly invite David and Larissa Furness to join us at the Moonlight Garden Restaurant, 47, Leroy Lane, Templestowe, next Wednesday, May 4th, at 8 p.m. Please bring all necessary documents. If retaliation were planned, it would have happened when you least expected it. RSVP not required, but your attendance would be greatly appreciated. We sealed it in an envelope and sent it that evening. In the following 2 days, I received 3 more messages from Larissa, but then they ceased. I assumed this indicated when the invitation had been delivered. Back at home, things were gradually improving. Despite sharing a bed where we only slept, we were now engaging in genuine conversations that were less awkward than before. Our barriers were slowly breaking down. We did our best to prepare for the meeting, but there were numerous uncertainties. On Wednesday night, we dressed up, Liz in a flattering, elegant dark blue gown and myself in a pricey suit. "Here we go," I murmured, and she nervously smiled. I approached her, embraced her, and then kissed her. Both of us were tense at first, but the kiss evolved from hesitant to passionate, and soon we were holding each other tightly. Finally, our walls were crumbling. Eventually, we stopped kissing, and I took a step back. "Could you please be close to me when we get home?" Liz inquired. "I've been tested and nothing showed up, but—" "Yes," I agreed, kissing her once more. The anger was dissipating, replaced by relief and even affection. We smiled at each other like young lovers and left for the restaurant. David and Larissa were 15 minutes late. When they arrived, David immediately launched into an attack. "What do you want?" he growled without even sitting down. "Please, take a seat," I urged. After a long pause, they reluctantly complied. David seemed uneasy beneath his bravado. I said, "What do you want?" he repeated aggressively. "We want to understand why you've been trying to break up our marriage." "What if we don't want to tell you?" he smirked. "Then we'll have to find an arrangement that makes you want to," I replied calmly. They exchanged a glance, a glimmer of hope flickering between them. "How did you find out where we live? Did you follow her?" His tone was disdainful when he referred to her. "Yes," I admitted, and David looked at Larissa with contempt. "But I already knew, having followed you from my home earlier." Larissa chuckled. This was good. It kept them on edge. "Our information is worth 15,000, David declared. I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" I questioned. "It must be valuable." "What is it?" "Money first," he insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "Tell me what it is. You can skip the details, but I need to know exactly what it involves, or there's no deal." They exchanged another look. Larissa nodded subtly. "I have a paper trail that identifies who hired us, and the names will explain why." Just at that moment, the waiter came over to take our drink order. I informed him that we were still making a decision and asked him to come back in 5 minutes. When everything was settled, I decided it was time to get serious. "You both tried to ruin our marriage," I said in a threatening tone. "You slept with my wife." "It was just intimacy," Larissa began, but Liz's look immediately silenced her. "I'm not going to pay you anything right now," David said, standing up, and Larissa followed his example. "In that case, we have no reason to provide you with this information," he said. "Let me give you one reason," I interjected. "How do you think Anderson and Phillips would react if a video of one of their trainee lawyers having an affair with a married woman suddenly appeared on the internet?" "You don't have a video recording," he replied confidently. "What if you get a copy of a letter from your husband threatening legal action at work?" "As I said, you don't have it," he insisted, turning to Larissa. "Let's go." I picked up my phone, pressed play video, and saw David's face turn pale. "I've made sure that Liz's identity remains hidden, but you know who she is," I explained. "There is also an audio recording, but I won't include it here." David glared at Liz. "How dare you?" "I didn't know, you idiot," Liz retorted. "How do you think we were caught?" "Shut up, David," I interrupted. I'm tired of your games. Give us everything right now, and I promise that this—" I pointed to my phone. "Won't go any further. Abstain, and everything will be revealed." "But we were supposed to get 10,000, Larissa protested. "Without this money, we will lose our home." "Bad luck," I snapped, fed up with both of them. "Give me the information and he'll keep his job. You'll find another home." "That's it, I'm going to—" David started walking towards me. "Don't, David," Liz warned, putting her hand in her purse. "Or I'll happily shoot you." David hesitated. "You don't have a gun there," he blurted out. "Try it, and this time I'll see it through," Liz challenged. David looked from one to the other, resigned to the inevitable. "Just give it to them," he told Larissa. She pulled out a bulky envelope and handed it to Liz, glaring at her. "Disappear," I suggested, "and stay away from both of us." Dejected, they left without even looking back. When they were out of sight, I looked at Liz and we both smiled. "A gun?" I asked. "That was the only thing that came to my mind," she replied, and we burst out laughing. Dinner wasn't bad, but we skipped dessert. We couldn't wait to get home and see what we had. When we got home, we stood in the hallway for a while. I couldn't wait to open the envelope, but I promised to make love to her as soon as we arrived. Liz chuckled. "Consensual intimacy is better when it's not just about keeping a promise," she said. "Let's read first and then move on to more interesting things." It seemed to me that she had read my mind. "Thank you," I said, smiling back. "You can make amends later," she added. I intended to do it, and I was sure that I would like it. By then, the barriers between us seemed to have completely disappeared. We were seated next to each other at the table, and as we opened the envelope, we found a stack of pages clipped together containing numerous emails spanning multiple threads. Starting with the oldest email at the back, we began reading through them. These emails clearly referenced an individual whom I'll refer to as G. G served as the general manager of the Australian division of a sizable American company, which I'll denote as JH. Neither Liz nor I had any prior dealings with G or JH. It appeared that G had been corresponding with Larissa. The emails conveyed an intriguing narrative, though there were gaps which seemed to have been addressed through phone conversations. The messages read, "Hi Elle, thanks for the cut, I loved it. I might have something that could assist with your current situation, but it's quite unconventional. Give me a call at—" she provided her mobile number. G. "Hi Elle, please come in tomorrow at 11 hour to discuss further. Bring D if possible." G. "Hi G, Dave, can't make it tomorrow." L. "Hi L, no problem. See you tomorrow at 11. G. "Hi L, if you truly believe he's capable of this, I believe we can extend an offer." G. "Hi G, he can do it. Do you want a test?" L. "Really?" "Yes, he can do it tomorrow evening if you'd like." "Hi L, you were correct about him. He's impressive. I'll be feeling it for days. You're so fortunate. Thanks for letting me know. If you too can succeed with this, you'll be well rewarded." G. "Hi G, we're up for it." "Hi L, the contract has been sent. Please start immediately. Time is of the essence." G. "Hi G, he was with her last night, said it was easy." "Hi L, that's great news. Just be cautious with what you put in writing, please." G. "Hi G, second time's the charm, let's push for results." "Hi L, ASAP please. We want to move quickly on this." G. "Hi G, she wants to break up with Dave. We'll try to reconcile, and I'll support him." "Hi L, you got this, hun." G. "Hi G, made contact, he's hooked. Set for next week." That was the last of the emails. Liz and I sat down for a while, discussing our findings. We now knew the identity of the person and the company behind the scheme to break us up, and it seemed likely one of my relatives was involved. I realized I needed to dig deep into JH. "There's another page," Liz said, pulling it out of the envelope. It was brief, but incriminating. It was the contract mentioned earlier, stupidly done on official letterhead by G. It was labeled strictly confidential, but we read it anyway. We, JH, agree to pay Larissa and David Furness $5,000 each if, thanks to their efforts, they're able to deduce an international patent number, including a specific number, to the market within 3 months from the date of conclusion of this contract. In addition, we will pay an additional 5,000 Australian dollars if JH is able to purchase a patent for 10,000 Australian dollars or less. The agreement was signed, certified, and dated. With this document in hand, it became clear that we had the necessary evidence, and the next step was how to use it. We hid the documents in the safe and went up to our bedroom. I didn't know what to expect, but I was surprised to find that being close to Liz felt the same as always. It was wonderful. After that, we fell asleep soundly. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but compare my performance unfavorably to vivid images etched in my mind. I worried that I might not satisfy her now that she had measured me against someone younger, fitter, and more virile. Though our barriers were down, scars remained where they once stood. The next morning, Liz glanced at me. "You could have been with her. She was stunning," she remarked. "I chose you," I answered, kissing her with fervor. After Liz left for work, I decided to conduct some research. JH was a fairly large company based in the Bible Belt region of America. Their website portrayed them as valuing honesty and family values. I discovered they were promoting online an invention I had patented 5 years earlier, and it appeared they were profiting greatly from it. Upon realizing this, I recalled receiving an anonymous offer through a lawyer a couple of years ago to buy the patent, but they had hesitated at my asking price. Despite that, they proceeded with production anyway. Even without the details from the envelope, I knew I had a strong legal case against them. However, I wasn't satisfied with just that. This had become personal, and JH had made it as personal as it could be. That evening, once again, I didn't attend the car club. Instead, Liz and I had a thorough discussion about the matter, and we eventually devised a straightforward plan. I drafted a letter addressed to Jay, the managing director of JH, marking it as private and confidential. The letter was concise. "Dear Sir, I was surprised to discover that your company is actively selling the XXXX product, which I designed and hold worldwide patents for. I was dismayed to learn that your Australian management has resorted to employing individuals to manipulate my wife of 18 years and myself, aiming to acquire my patents under distressing circumstances. I possess evidence of this, including an original contract on your company letterhead, securely stored. I propose to sell the patents for this product to JH for the sum of $10,000 or $10 million. This offer is non-negotiable and stands firm. If I do not receive acceptance of this offer within 60 days from the date of this letter, with a settlement date no later than 60 days after acceptance, I will assume the offer has been declined and will initiate legal proceedings against JH with significant media involvement. This offer expires precisely 60 days from the date of this letter, and any counteroffer below $20 million made thereafter will not be considered. I anticipate your prompt response. However, I must stipulate that I will not engage in any discussions involving G, your Australian manager, due to her central role in this matter. I have signed the letter and sent it by priority mail." 2 weeks later, I received a call from Jay himself, expressing shock and attempting to negotiate a lower price. I firmly declined, insisting my offer was final and non-negotiable. Subsequently, I engaged in discussions with JH's legal team in Australia. After 4 weeks, I secured the contract. JH acquired my patents, along with all related documentation gathered from David and Larissa. A stringent confidentiality clause ensured that I couldn't disclose details about the product or reveal the company's identity or its employees' names. One stipulation I insisted upon was preventing any payments to David and Larissa, intending to secure their silence through threats rather than rewards. When questioned by JH's lawyers about my firm stance on this issue, I explained that I didn't harbor personal animosity toward David and Larissa. In truth, I saw the entire ordeal as a wake-up call for both parties. However, I made it clear to the lawyers that I staunchly opposed rewarding their egregious behavior. Liz and I have both retired, so there's little reason to continue working. We've now started an ambitious travel plan. Twice a year for 2 to 3 months each time, we'll travel to a different country and really immerse ourselves in its culture. Our goal is to explore as many countries as possible this way. Additionally, we're considering a move. With some extra funds available, I'm thinking about getting another car or two, though nothing too extravagant. Perhaps an SLR 5000 and a Bathurst Monero. We're also in need of a smaller house and a much larger garage. We've hired personal trainers and are exercising regularly as well as carefully watching our diets. Currently, I believe we're as fit as we were when we first met. Finally, I plucked up the courage to ask Liz the question that was bothering me. Was he better than me? She looked at me seriously, sensing my desire for an honest answer. He's not talking about anything. She was silent for a moment. Honestly, I insisted, and she nodded. He had more stamina, which was more physically satisfying, she explained. But there was no emotional connection between us. I nodded understandingly. Do you remember that GTR Skyline we used for a test drive? She asked. Yes. It was incredibly impressive, but it seemed soulless, as if there was no connection between us. I smiled knowingly. I see, I replied quietly, then looked at her seriously. Would you be willing to learn techniques with me? To prolong and improve intimacy? I asked. What if the instructor was an attractive woman? Would you like to train with her? No, I said. What if it was a handsome man? No, she replied, smiling. Okay, I said. How about we try it, but strictly on the principle of teach, but don't touch? That's settled, Liz said with a playful twinkle in her eyes, and we went to bed. In my opinion, the best way to beautify a place where a heavy wall once stood is to lay out a beautiful garden on it. Memories cannot be erased, but we can make something positive grow out of them.